Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving deep into the brain to figure out something incredible. How can one tiny molecule completely change the way we see the world? We're going to go on a journey from that single chemical key all the way up to the very nature of consciousness.
So let's start with a name, psychedelic. It was actually coined way back in 1956, and it comes from the Greek for mind manifesting. And that's such a perfect description, right? Because these things don't just make you see weird stuff, they seem to pull back the curtain on how our own minds are put together.
And that right there is the huge question scientists are racing to answer. I mean, think about it. How can one little molecule do all that? How does it trigger this whole cascade of effects that can totally reshape what it feels like to be you?
Okay, to really get it, we've got to zoom way, way in. I'm talking down to the molecular level. Let's think of these psychedelics as chemical keys. And before we can figure out what they unlock, we've got to take a close look at the keys themselves.
So, it turns out that pretty much all the classic psychedelics fit into two main chemical families. You've got your tryptamines, that's things like psilocin, the active ingredient in magic mushrooms, and then you have the phenethylamines, like mescaline from the peyote cactus. And what's wild is that even though they come from totally different places, they're built on the same basic blueprint. It's like they have the same fundamental shape. Now, here's where it gets really interesting. That chemical structure, it's incredibly sensitive. You just tweak it a tiny, tiny bit, like move a couple of atoms from here to there, and bam, you can get these huge, massive effects. It can completely change how powerful a drug is, or even if it can cross the blood-brain barrier and get to work in the first place.
Okay, check this out. This is a perfect example. On the screen, you've got psilocin and buprenorphine. They're practically chemical twins, almost identical. But there's this one tiny difference in psilocin's shape that lets it kind of fold up on itself. That little trick makes it slippery enough to sneak past the brain's security system, the blood-brain barrier. Buprenorphine, it can't do that fold, so it gets stopped at the gate. Totally different outcome.
All right, so we've got the key. The next question is obvious. What's the lock in the brain that this key is made for?
Well, after decades of work, the science is pretty clear. The evidence is just overwhelming. It all points to one main target, the master switch. And that switch is a serotonin receptor called 5-HT2A. So what is this thing? Well, the 5-HT2A receptor is basically a little protein sitting on the outside of your brain cells. And how do we know it's the one? It's pretty cool, actually. Scientists can give someone a blocker drug, one that only clogs up the specific 5-HT2A receptor. And when they do that, and then give them LSD or psilocybin, poof, the psychedelic effects almost completely disappear. That's the smoking gun. So once that psychedelic key slides into the 5-HT2A lock, it's like it rings a doorbell inside the neuron. And that doesn't just make a little chime. It kicks off this whole chain reaction, a cascade of signals firing one after another. And the final result? The neuron's behavior completely changes. How it fires, how it talks to other neurons, it's all different.
But hold on, because this isn't just a quick little electrical zap that fades away. No, that initial signal is just the beginning of something way more profound. It's the first step in a process that can actually physically remodel the brain. We're talking about neuroplasticity, which is just a fancy word for the brain's amazing ability to rewire itself, to form new connections. And this is where psychedelics are superstars. Some scientists even call them psychoplastogens because they are so incredibly good at kicking this process into high gear. They help neurons grow new branches and sprout more of these little connection points called dendritic spines. So what does this rewiring actually look like? I mean, can we see it? You bet. Thanks to some seriously powerful microscopes, researchers can literally watch this happen. So here, this is a neuron from the frontal cortex. This is the before shot. See all those little bumps? Those are the spines, the connection points. This is its normal baseline state. Okay, now, get ready for the after. This is what that same kind of neuron looks like just 24 hours after one dose of psilocybin. The difference is just, wow, it's stunning. You can see a huge, rapid increase in not just the number of those spines, but their size too. The neuron is literally sprouting new connections, branching out like a tree in fast forward. And here's the kicker, the really important part. This isn't just a temporary high. This isn't just a flash in the pan. This physical rewiring lasts. Studies show these new connections can stick around for a month, maybe even longer. And that could be the key to why a single psychedelic experience can have such powerful, long-lasting therapeutic effects.
Okay, let's zoom back out. We've seen what happens to one tiny neuron. But what happens when you do this to millions of them all at once? How does all this new wiring change the way the entire brain communicates? Well, the best analogy I've heard is that it's like shaking up a snow globe. See, in our normal, sober, everyday life, our brain is super organized. It's efficient. It has these specialized networks that do their own thing. One of the big ones is called the default mode network, or the DMN. This network is kind of the mean network. It's what's active when you're daydreaming, thinking about yourself, or worrying about the future. You can even call it the headquarters of your ego. But when a psychedelic comes on board, that rigid, orderly structure just melts away. Brain scans show that the DMN, that mean network, starts to disintegrate. It loses its grip. And at the exact same time, the rest of the brain lights up in a state of what scientists call hyperconnectivity. All these different parts of the brain that usually keep to themselves suddenly start chatting with each other like crazy, especially the parts that handle your senses. And this is so cool because this massive shift in brain activity seems to line up perfectly with what people actually report feeling. That breakdown of the DMN, the me network, that lines up with feelings of ego dissolution, that classic psychedelic experience of feeling connected to everything. And all that new chatter between the sensory parts of your brain, well, that could be why people experience things like synesthesia, seeing sounds or tasting colors. So, look how far we've come. We started with one tiny molecule, we followed it to one specific receptor, saw how it physically rewired a single neuron, and then zoomed out to see how it reshuffles the communication of the entire brain. It's like we're drawing a brand new map of the mind. So, where does this map lead us next? Well, it leads us straight into one of the biggest debates in psychedelic science right now. Is the trip itself, that profound, mystical, mind-bending experience, is that essential for the healing, or could we maybe design a drug that gives you all the brain rewiring benefits, all that neuroplasticity, without the intense psychedelic journey? And that leaves us with one last massive thought. As we keep learning how these chemical keys can unlock and literally reconfigure the hardware of our minds, what are we on the verge of discovering about the software? What are we about to learn about the very nature of consciousness itself?